Okay, hey guys, Dan here, and I want to look at a couple of quantum computing stocks. But first of all, I want to thank or congratulate whatever a bunch of you that are not Stock Market Mentor members for coming to today's Monday training session. I always have a training session with people on Monday, and I got a lot of positive feedback on that. And actually, several of you decided that maybe you wanted to drop $7 after all for a 2-day free look. Now that was kind of by invitation only, and what I mean by that is I had said on Friday, if you want to do that, you're not going to get an email. You need to email Karen at stockmarketmentor.com. And so I'll just extend it one more time. Like if you weren't able to come or you didn't listen, you didn't watch Friday, I actually don't expect you to watch every single thing I do. But if you missed that, you can email her. Again, it's Karen at stockmarketmentor.com. Email her and just ask her to send you a recording of the session. It was pretty good. It was an hour and a half long, about 90 minutes or so. I covered a lot of ground, and we went over our active trade list, which frankly is the bomb. And it's the gift that keeps on giving, even when the market is kind of crappy like it was yesterday. It's actually given us a good opportunity to buy some stuff. So anyway, definitely check that out. Again, just email her at Karen at stockmarketmentor.com, and that's how you can get a recording of that. And that includes if you've already been a trial member, but for whatever reason, you decided it wasn't for you. I still invite you to get that training session. And you know what? Maybe it'll change your mind. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. We're going to look at some charts here, which means you're not going to be looking at me, which is a good thing. So I want to look at IONQ. Now, this stock we've had this on the list, and you can see where this has been a really, really good situation. Buying this a little bit late and had to put in a pretty tight stop, but the stock's been working all the way up. Now, that was that trade. This is what I want to look at though. So you can see how big move higher. And by the way, check out the volume. It's just a massive bunch of volume here. This is all institutional buying, just massive volume. Notice how it had been trending during this sideways trend. Nobody really seemed to care too much about the stock relative to what's going on now. So we've got a lot of activity here, and this is more than just Billy, Bob, Jethro, and Austin buying their stocks here. This is big institutional buying, and they just seem to kind of keep on buying. It'd been in a sideways drift for a long time. And then if you look at the weekly chart, you can actually see how this trade, I might be stretching it a little bit, but only a little bit. It's kind of come out of a squeeze. And when you see this on a weekly chart, when you see a stock popping out of a squeeze like this, on heavy volume like we have here, this is a stock that can continue to run. So here's the thing. I'm going to give you a price target of $100, and you should laugh at that and say, Dan, of course it's going to $100. Do you think I'm blind? And the answer is no. And the reason I'm saying that is when you look at this pattern like this, when you look at this price, you look at the way this stock's moving, it's got so much momentum. It's tracking right along the upper Bollinger Band. In fact, outside of the upper Bollinger Band. And this is on a weekly chart. Like this is a monster move here. And I think it's just going to continue to run here. So this is definitely something that you want to be tracking. And also, if you look at Rigetti, Rigetti has just been on a major, major monster move. This was something that I did the other day, comparing 2 and 3 standard deviations. But we'll look at the weekly chart. Yeah. Okay, I got to say it. So we got in this stock at a really favorable level right here at 1460. So we're up over 250% on this now. And the thing that I want to point out is this R multiple. Yeah, we're up at 273, 273%. But what I want to talk about real quick is just this. Because we were able to put in such a tight stop, let me show you. Yeah. So because we were able to put in such a tight stop here, our R multiple, and I went into this in a little more detail, I'm not going to go into it now. Our R multiple on this is now 63.5. And what this means is for every dollar that we risked, we're making 63 bucks. What you really want is just trades that can at least get you like 3R. Here's a 2.8, $2.80. So I risk a buck. So far, I'm getting $2.80. Now, that's better than the old sharp stick in the eye, as they say. But I don't know who they are. And hopefully, they're not like blind in one eye. But the point is, we want to see these R's get up here, really get up here in magnitude. And we've got a few. That are. We got 3 stocks here that are up above 100%. But with respect to what I'm talking about today, so IONQ, this has actually been kind of drifting sideways. Look, compared to this, which is just going straight up. This one, Quantum, has also been just kind of drifting sideways for a bit versus this that's also been running higher. So all of these things, the worst of them is the worst of the bunch are still doing okay. The best of the bunch are doing awesome. And so as I look at IONQ, I think that's only been kind of doing okay. Now it's close to doing awesome again. So this really has, at least in my view, about a 25% upside. And I don't think it's going to take a long time for it to get there. My sense is you're probably going to see it up there by the end of the month if this breakout holds true, if it follows through on this tomorrow. And Rigetti, you know what? I stopped trying to figure out how high this is when this is going to go. Just higher. That's it. Like, hey, Dan, how high do you think this is going to go? Well, higher. That's all I got for you. Let's hope for 60 just before we get 65 and 70. But this has been the best trade that I've had on in our active trade list in quite some time. And so I want you to be a part of this, our community. If you're not a member, please, it's $7 for 14 days. Check it out. Typically, I forget I think if I recall correctly, because I just hired a data cruncher, and what Gail tells me is that if somebody signs up for a $7 look, we've got about 90% that stick around to be members, and that's something that I'm awfully proud of because it's $150 as opposed to $70 or $7. And by the way, I am going to be raising the prices for new members, not existing members, but for newer members up to $200, probably before the end of the year. And I'm not going to really make a big fanfare about it, but that's going to happen. We're way too cheap for the kind of money that people are making. And I even have existing members who are paying the lower price tell me, you really should be raising your prices because you're way too low. So anyway, I'm going to be taking their advice pretty soon, sometime in the next month or two. So take advantage of it now. That's all I got for you. I will see you next time.